Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Sarah, for those who don't know me, and in this video I will be creating a portrait painting of one of the Ilyas Repin painting. This work has been divided into two videos. The first one is the portrait drawing. It's the first video I've done on this portrait, and this is the second video, which is the portrait painting, where I will show you how I personally use academic painting techniques, and a little bit of my small touches and style to create a portrait painting. For those of you who did not follow the first video, which is the video of the drawing, I will be copying actually the portrait of Jurkevich by Ilya Repin, which has been created in 1879 using screen-based reference. I will be using my computer for this in order for me to help to create the portrait. For those of you who don't know who Ilya Repin is, a brief explanation on this artist, which is Ilya Repin is one of the main figures in figurative painting in the 19th and 20th century. And I really love his work, I really love his expressions, and it's very interesting and intriguing for me. Actually, this is one of my favorite paintings. The materials I will be using are first a portrait canvas, size around 40 by 30 centimeters. Then for the brushes, I use several fine brushes for details, then wider ones for the big strokes for the background, for example. And for the acrylic painting, I usually use titanium white, zinc white, yellow ochre, cadmium yellow deep hue, cadmium red hue, permanent alizarin crimson, sap green, acrylic burnt umber, ultramarine blue in a red shape, and ivory black. You'll find the list of the materials in the comment box below, so don't worry, don't try to note all the materials. I don't have a favorite brand, but what I did is that I usually and I personally buy what I find in the market. So I have several brands that I like, for example, Sennelier, which is a really, really good brand, and Winsor and Newton, and Liquitex. So these, and Lefranc Bourgeois. So these are the main brands that I buy, but you're not really obligated to buy the same brand as I do. This is a practice exercise, so if you want to practice, my advice for you, don't buy really expensive paint and acrylic paint. And if you want to become more professional in your work, I really suggest to hit these kind of brands such as Sennelier, Winsor and Newton, Lefranc Bourgeois. So voilà. So to create the first layer of my flesh tone, I'm gonna mix the following colors, which are titanium white, yellow ochre, alizarin crimson, and sap green. Using my Da Vinci number 12 brush, I start with the face by laying down the basic flesh colors. Later on, I will be using a finer brush for the details. You should probably know that the acrylic darkens when it dries since it loses luminosity. The luminosity decreases with the evaporation of water. So this is a little bit of science fact you need to know. So now the question is, how do I know where to put the right colors for the flesh tones? Here we are painting a portrait. So the colors I used are specifically designated for portrait. Whereas, for example, if you were painting something else like still life or another theme or genre, the colors will be different. So in this case, here are the principal colors of the flesh tones, as I've said earlier, that I'm using to create my first layer, which are titanium white, yellow ochre, permanent alizarin crimson, and sap green. Later on, the details will be enhanced by using secondary colors, which are the following: zinc white, cadmium yellow deep hue, cadmium red hue, acrylic burnt umber, ultramarine blue, and ivory black. Keep in mind that you need to take some steps back to assess your work. Or for example, you can take a little bit of like 5 minutes break or 10 minutes break in order to get back to your work and to have a fresher view. Using these colors, we will create a harmonious portrait. In the color study, a painting is divided between the cool and warm colors, light and darkness. And to understand that, I have created a color study. A color study is a saturated study between cool light and warm light, cool darkness and warm darkness. The trick is when we have a natural light that illuminates the subject, which is our case here, and we want to create a proximity effect, we use warmth, whether it's in the lightness or darkness. And if we want to create a distancing effect, we usually use a cooler tone, whether, like I said, if it's light or dark. That is how we create a kind of volume using painting. To create a warm tone, a warm effect at this point on the forehead, I usually use the principal colors I've talked about earlier, and I mixed with a note of cadmium red hue for a more orangey note to create this warmth effect. And now to create this cool effect, this cool note on the forehead, which basically is found in between the hair and the forehead. This area is, we are creating this area, although in the brightness, in the lightness, but this distancing effect. I usually use a little bit of ultramarine blue to create this greenish mixture. So this greenish note will be in the light, but will create this distancing effect since it is a cool note. I mix cadmium red hue and titanium white with previously created skin color base. Here I am darkening the warm notes for the shading effect with burnt umber. I mix now alizarin crimson and burnt umber to create a shading effect with a warm tone. By following the values I made in part 1, which is the drawing part, and the values I'm talking about is the dark and light, I will be able to place my cold and warm light as well as my cold and warm shading. By alternating hot and cold, I respect the luminosity and the shading to create the color of the skin. For the skin color, I start to dilute with less water compared to what I did in part 1 because I am no longer seeking for this washing effect which I used before to fill my canvas. This area is the frontal area, it's the brightness accentuated frontal area. To create a dark warm tone, I am mixing yellow ochre and alizarin crimson. Here is the area where I am brightening up a little bit. I am creating a warm note for my shading part on this area of the face by mixing burnt umber, alizarin crimson, sap green, and yellow ochre. The same tone and warm shading is found on the contour of the nose. What I am aiming here to have is an orangey effect, orangey color, by mixing with yellow ochre. I want to have a lighter value for this area. I am using here alizarin crimson, yellow ochre, and burnt umber for the shading effect. For the cheek part, I take into consideration the values I created in part 1, which is the light and dark, and I create the color of the cheek skin color by mixing yellow ochre, alizarin crimson, and sap green for a cooler note. For the eyebrows area, I add ivory black. I darken this area using ultramarine blue and create a cool note with a hint of yellow ochre and sap green. I do not use white to brighten up, unless I am aiming for a highlighted point, which is not the case for the present moment. The color white usually neutralizes the colors by creating a dull luminosity, whereas here I am seeking to create warmth in my luminosity, so instead of using white, I use yellow ochre. I refer myself to the study of colors, the color study I did earlier. Warm luminosity, cold luminosity, warm shade, and cold shade to build the tones. I try as much as possible not to merge them together. That's why I like when I use acrylic, as it dries quickly. To also leave transparency so that it can later release the shadow and light previously built in part 1 of the portrait, which is the video of the drawing. The jawline has a reflected light, so I take into consideration this area to create brightness. And now I finish by creating lightning touches on the forehead and nose by using white. And since these are the two parts where the light is reflected the most. I just finished laying down the big strokes on the face, and now I prepared the background painting. Out of respect for the original painting, I chose to work with a shade of green, and for that I use ivory black and titanium white for this grayish effect, and yellow ochre and ultramarine blue for a greenish color to give a distancing background, which means a faded green. The mixture of these four colors gives a subtle transition towards the foreground. I will be using a large brush for big strokes because I don't want to work on the details for this part of the painting. The goal here is to accentuate on the subject by playing with details, values, and color study. As for the background, the strokes I lay down on the canvas are wide so that I can cover it all, respecting, of course, the light and shadow of it. Following the light and shadow of my previously prepared background in part 1, I accentuate on the light by adding titanium white to the prepared greenish color of the background. as for the dark side of the background, we enhance this darkness by adding ivory black and ultramarine blue to the mixture of the background greenish color I prepared earlier. The clothes of the model are a transition between the background and the foreground, in our case, the face. So, with our big brush and a little bit of sap green added to the background greenish mixture that we've prepared earlier for the background, we obtain a kind of a proximity green for the clothes. I use ultramarine blue mixed with sap green to darken certain area. And I use titanium white to enhance a faded lightness. Now that the basic colors are in place, I begin to set up the details by using a fine brush and little water to accentuate the colors. Because when water evaporates, the brightness of the colors used will diminish. That is why I recommend to use water only to clean the brushes and to transition properly from cool tone to warm tone and from dark to light. I prepared the skin flesh color again using the same color I used at the beginning and add ultramarine blue, yellow ochre and titanium white. I accentuate on a greenish cool luminosity on the left end of the forehead. Towards the middle of the forehead, I add a small amount of blue to create a cool tone and a little white to the left. As for the eyebrows, I use a burnt umber, zinc white, and ivory black for a slightly grayish tone. Again, towards the middle of the forehead, I use the greenish color prepared earlier and add it to the flesh colors plus zinc white. I add yellow ochre to highlight the lightest area and to mark this transition between the flesh tones and the highlight. Towards the left forehead, I add ultramarine blue for a cool tone and yellow ochre for a warm tone. The left side of the forehead has a distancing greenish color, so I mix ultramarine blue and yellow ochre to obtain this effect. To have a proximity effect on the right side of the face, I create a warm shadow by mixing Alizarin crimson, yellow ochre, burnt umber to the skin color prepared on my palette. The edge between the hair and the face is a little bit greenish. As you can see, there are a lot of colors mixtured for each part of the portrait. That is why a painting takes time and patience. So don't forget to take breaks to have a fresher look when you come back to work on this painting. Around the middle of the forehead, I add a little bit of pink. On the middle side of the forehead, there is a subtle brightness. The right side tends towards warmth. For this transition, I use yellow ochre. A subtle and natural transition tip is to re-emphasize the green a little bit on the edges between the hair and the forehead and between the eyebrows and the forehead. I finished this part with some finishing touches. I use a fine brush for details, the finest brush I have, to work on the eyes area. I raise back the layers I created before to obtain a kind of transparency and a harmonious transition between layers. Here I mix ultramarine blue with zinc white for the eyebrows. For a greenish tone, I use ultramarine blue mixed with yellow ochre. For the area of the left eye, I used alizarin crimson and burnt umber mixed together to create this color. Then I slightly lighten up the area between the eyebrows and frontal head. I add a little bit of yellow ochre because I'm getting to a warmer area. For a cooler flesh tone, I accentuate with a note of ultramarine blue. As for a regular detailed flesh color, which is the flesh color between warm and cool, I mix alizarin crimson with titanium white and yellow ochre, and this time I add cadmium yellow, which is going to give me a saturated effect, along with sap green for this proximity effect. For a warmer tone, I add cadmium red hue in order to keep on with the saturation effect that will give me what I said earlier, warmth. I increase the brightness of light by adding titanium white to cadmium yellow. For the right part of the cheek area, the colors are alizarin crimson, titanium white, and cadmium yellow. And for a warmer tone, I add cadmium red hue along with zinc white for a pinkish warm color. For the pupil and iris of the eye, I use ivory black, burnt umber, and a slight note of white, preferably zinc white. For the sclera part of the eye, which is the white surrounding the iris, I use zinc white with a dash of titanium white, along with ultramarine blue and yellow ochre, cadmium yellow, and ivory black. To accentuate the warmth of the right eye, because it's closer to us, to give this proximity effect, I use alizarin crimson and burnt umber with a note of cadmium red hue. To smoothen out the transition between parts, I use burnt umber, alizarin crimson, and yellow ochre. As for the right eyebrow, I brighten up a little bit using yellow ochre while remaining in the darkness of the shading because this part is dark. I keep a close look on my color study model, which is the model I built at the beginning of this portrait painting, which are warmth dark and cool darkness, or warmth shading and cool shading, and warmth lightness and cool lightness, to continue adding mixture of colors for each part of the face and for the remaining of the face. Now we go back to the background area, and the base is already greenish, shifting between light green and dark greenish. So I respect these values and start softening it to have a harmonious painting. I mix titanium white with yellow ochre, ultramarine blue, and a note of ivory black. I want to give the illusion of distance, so it is important not to use saturated effect or saturation effect by using the right colors, and I want to hit a more faded mixture. The background is an important element and an important part of this whole composition. So it is important to give a subtle rendering of fading effect when working with an academic approach like in this case. Therefore, I do not overvaluate it with unnecessary details unless these details are a transition between the background and the main subject, like in our case, the clothes and the hair. I use titanium white for luminosity area and ultramarine blue for the shadow. By using a big brush, I lay down big strokes. Just to let you know that there is an invisible oblique line that goes from the top right part to the bottom left of this painting, crossing by the subject lightest forms. What this means? This means that depending on the lightness and darkness of our subject, of the face, we usually create the background, which means where the subject is illuminated, the background is dark, and vice versa. So this creates a balance in the portrait. I accentuate the darkness with a note of burnt umber and a small touch of ivory black to create this grayish-green effect. What I did in part 1 of this portrait process, which is the drawing video, I laid down the basis of values between light and dark. This has helped me construct a harmonious transition between layers. I finish with white strokes on the clothes by mixing titanium white, yellow ochre, ultramarine blue, and ivory black, plus sap green. Why do I use sap green here? Because sap green is going to help me separate this color mixture from the background to create a proximity effect, to create this transition between the background and the foreground. Again, the background is this greenish-grayish effect, and this foreground, it is the face. So by using sap green, I have this proximity effect and this subtle transition between the background and the face. As I alternate between light and darkness, using yellow ochre for light and ultramarine blue for darkness, I rapidly build up a non-finishing effect to complete my painting. And that's it, guys, for this painting process tutorial. We've started with a drawing process, building up the anatomical form, the values, and then we continued with this part 2 by understanding the color study to create this portrait painting. It's a mixture between academic inspiration, not really mixture, and it's inspiration between an academic approach and my own style of painting touches, since I use acrylic paint and not oil. So that's it, guys. I really hope I was helpful for you and you've learned something new today. I want to wish you well, and I hope to see you very soon for a next video. Don't forget, if you have any comment or critique, please do write it in the comment box below. I'll be more than happy to reply and answer any of your questions. So take care and have a beautiful day. Ciao!